One of the things that I'm really trying to get into is live streaming on Twitch, mainly because I think it's a fantastic way for me to connect with you guys, for me to game with you guys, and for me to interact with you guys, especially because there's like 20 to 30 people in each stream, and I'm blessed to have hundreds of thousands of subscribers on this channel. So if you want a little bit more, if you want to just come through and chill with me, if you want to just talk to me directly, suggest video ideas, just talk basketball as I'm playing NBA 2K against you or with you, go to the description down below. I'm going to be live streaming on Twitch later on tonight at 9 p.m. Pacific time. Now that that's done, let's get to today's video because this is very interesting stuff. Kevin Garnett is by far one of the most versatile power forwards of all time, one of the most talented power forwards of all time, and without a doubt, he's completely changed the way the position has played till this day. You have to understand, before Kevin Garnett's time, most power forwards would just be there to rebound the ball and that's it. They weren't really good at shooting the mid-range jumper, and although there were some exceptions to that rule, Kevin Garnett came alongside and made it the new standard for power forwards to be able to not only rebound and play great defense, but to also score. And he also set a lot of other milestones as well. Bear in mind, this is one of the first players to be successful after being drafted out of high school. And this paved the way for other superstars such as Kobe Bryant and Tracy McGrady. Kevin Garnett, without a doubt, is one of the most important players in NBA history. But he's done even more stuff throughout his career that no one's ever done. Bear in mind, this is a guy that won the MVP in 2004. He's a 15-time All-Star. He just has so many accolades, and of course, he was an NBA champion. But before he became an NBA champion, he was drafted by the Minnesota Timberwolves with the 5th overall pick. And something that he did that most other players don't do anymore is he literally gave his best years to the Minnesota Timberwolves. He gave 12 years to the Timberwolves, and unfortunately, it didn't really produce such great results. They got very, very close a couple of times, most notably in the 2003 to 2004 season, but every Boston Celtic fan will tell you that Kevin Garnett's best years were definitely spent with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And of course, if you look into the statistics, they will back that exact notion up. The moment Kevin Garnett got traded from the Minnesota Timberwolves to the Boston Celtics, he went from being a consistent 20 points per game player and a consistent double-double player to a player that was a fringe double-double player but was no longer averaging a double-double, which is still fantastic considering the fact that he had to do what he had to do to win a championship. But, of course, he was no longer that dominant player anymore. So when Kevin Garnett comes out and absolutely says that the owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves, Glen Taylor, is a snake, I think it means something. That's like very similar to the late, great Kobe Bryant coming out and saying Jerry Buss was a snake if they were both alive. Oh my God, that just made me so sad. Imagine giving 12 years in your prime to an owner, to a franchise and a city, and then coming out and saying that the owner of that franchise is a snake. Of course, there's been times in NBA history where players played for an owner they don't like. More recently, the Donald Sterling era and the Los Angeles Clippers that played for him. There was this one shoot-around where the Clippers literally took off their warm-ups and put him in the center of the court and walked away because of his racist remarks, but I digress. This is a story of why Kevin Garnett absolutely hates Glen Taylor, who's the owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves. To give you the context of the situation, let's discuss what happened after Kevin Garnett's best years were behind him. Towards the tail end of his seasons with the Boston Celtics, eventually Danny Ainge pulled off this phenomenal trade where he traded a washed-up Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett to the Brooklyn Nets for, dude, I'm not kidding, but literally 3 future first-round picks. This was considered to be one of the greatest heists in NBA history, as a result of this trade, the Boston Celtics are literally contenders to this day. You know, there was no buffering period where the Celtics had to rebuild. But of course, Kevin Garnett was not able to fulfill his potential in Brooklyn because at this point he was in the NBA for 18 years, maybe 19 years. He would average 6 points per game at this point of his career. He was clearly no longer the player that he once was. And as a result, the Brooklyn Nets, after 2 years, would trade Kevin Garnett to the Minnesota Timberwolves in return for Thaddeus Young. And at that point, the Minnesota Timberwolves were absolutely terrible. This was the year before they got Karl Anthony Towns. Kevin Garnett would average like 7 points per game and would only play 5 games in that first season. And then that next season, he would only play 38 games. You would barely see him. It was very similar to when Dirk Nowitzki was retiring. They would bring him out, people would cheer for him, and that was about it. Now, during this time in the 2014 to 2015 season, Kevin Garnett was apparently discussing ownership with Glen Taylor. For one reason or another, maybe it's the first 12 years of his NBA career, Kevin Garnett felt a very strong bond with the Minnesota Timberwolves, and he wanted to purchase an ownership stake in the Minnesota Timberwolves. But there was a tragedy that occurred for the Minnesota Timberwolves around this time, and that was the death of an iconic member in Minnesota Timberwolves history, and that's Flip Saunders. Now, Flip Saunders was the general manager and the head coach of the Minnesota Timberwolves when Kevin Garnett played there in his prime. He was the reason why the Minnesota Timberwolves drafted Kevin Garnett straight out of high school, which at that time was a very, very weird thing to do. You don't typically draft a high schooler in the first 5 picks of the NBA draft, especially not in 1995. So you have to understand that Kevin Garnett felt this insane bond with Flip Saunders as a result of it. He felt like, oh my God, there's this one guy that truly believed in my talent enough that despite all skeptics saying you should not draft this young kid that foregoed his years at college, he still did it. He still drafted KG. The Timberwolves did show a tribute to Flip Saunders. They did show love for Flip Saunders, but Kevin Garnett felt like it was not enough. He really felt like that Flip should have at least gotten a banner at Target Center. And according to Kevin Garnett, he had this to say: "I thought he wasn't celebrated the proper way. You have high school banners, you have hockey banners, and you couldn't put a Flip banner in Target Center, someplace that we helped build. We established that market. I helped grow that with him, and you couldn't put him in the rafters?" And here's the thing you guys all understand about Kevin Garnett, man. He's a very emotional guy. He is a very sensitive and emotional guy. He shows that emotion in the middle of basketball games and sometimes gets into other players' heads. But sometimes his sensitivity is put on full-on display, and this was one of those situations. Because Kevin Garnett would go on, after he was asked about his potential partnership with Glen Taylor, he said, "I don't want to be partners with Glen, and I wouldn't want to be partners with Glen in Minnesota. I would love to be part of a group that buys him out and kind of removes him going forward." He went on to say that it was a huge disappointment and one that showed me the true Glen Taylor. It showed me how he really feels. When this guy got the team, it was worth $90 million. When I left it, it was worth somewhere in the $400 millions. That was never taken into account in my value or none of that. I guess I served my purpose and I was on to the next. So it's all good. It's all good. I'm moving on and taking my ball and playing somewhere else. All while this was going on, Kevin Garnett was still serving as a mentor to the brand new face of the Timberwolves, and that's Karl Anthony Towns. And as a matter of fact, Karl Anthony Towns really owes a lot of his development to his relationship with Kevin Garnett. And this is where we stand today. If you paid close attention, you would have to sit back and think, wow, it's very strange that the Minnesota Timberwolves have not retired the jersey of arguably the greatest player in its franchise's history. Bear in mind, Kevin Garnett, again, gave 12 seasons to this team, and I guess the best comparison you could make is KG to the Timberwolves was pretty much what Kobe was to the Lakers. And I understand KG didn't bring the hardware and he didn't have any championships or win any championships, but he was very, very important to the Minnesota Timberwolves franchise. He was Mr. Timberwolf for about 12 years, and so much so that he wanted to buy a stake in the team prior to all of this weirdness going on. Kevin Garnett pretty much feels betrayed because he talked to Flip Saunders prior to Flip dying about having an important role with the Minnesota Timberwolves once Kevin Garnett retired. So Garnett did an interview with The Athletic's Shams Charania recently, and he discussed his feelings about the situation, about how Glen Taylor hired Tom Thibodeau once Flip Saunders died and decided to go a completely different direction as opposed to hiring Kevin Garnett to oversee the franchise, which is what Flip Saunders discussed with KG prior to his death. And KG had this to say: "Glen knows where I'm at. I'm not entertaining it. First of all, it's not genuine. 2, he's getting pressure from a lot of fans, and I guess the community there. Glenn and I had an understanding before Flip died, and when Flip died, that understanding went with Flip. For that, I won't ever forgive Glenn. I won't forgive him for that. I thought he was a straight-up person, a straight-up businessman, and when Flip died, everything went with him. There's no reason to complain, just continue to move on. My years in Minnesota and that community I cherish. At this point, I don't want any dealings with Glen Taylor or Taylor Corp or anything that has anything to do with him. I love my Timberwolves. I'll always love my guys. I'll always love the people who mess with me there. I'll always have a special place for the city of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota in my heart, but I don't do business with snakes. I don't do business with snake. I try not to do business with openly snakes or people who are snake-like. What's strange about this entire situation is the Boston Celtics, who literally got 6 years out of KG and probably his maybe 2 years of his prime and won a championship with KG, literally are going to retire his number 5 jersey. The Boston Celtics, bear in mind, could you think of all the greats that played for the Boston Celtics? They're retiring his jersey. But the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have been an obscure franchise for most of the franchise's inception, refuse to retire Kevin Garnett's number 21. You have to bear in mind that at some point they're definitely going to retire his jersey, but for now it looks like there's some animosity between Kevin Garnett and Glen Taylor. What do you guys think about this situation between Glen Taylor and Kevin Garnett? Do you think KG's just taking things too far? Do you think he's getting too overly emotional? Would you like to hear Glen Taylor's side of things, because he's been fairly quiet about the entire situation? I'm your boy, TheFlightMike, and I'll catch you guys in our next upload.